So WDL has many features that you can use to do some cool analysis, but my main goal today is to go over some basic fundamentals and to use so that you can use these fundamentals to understand more powerful features described in the WDL documentation and in later tutorials. So let's go. So the three top level components that are part of the core structure of a WDL script are the workflow, the call, and the task. So first, the workflow. This is the workflow component is basically the workflow block. It's denoted by the special workflow keyword in the WDL language. This is here where you give a name to your workflow. And this is an important namespace identifier that'll be useful to keep track of later. Basically, you can think of the workflow block as an outline for your entire WDL workflow. So part of your workflow block has the inputs and outputs that you'd like to put into your workflow. Like I said, the workflow block is an outline. So the inputs that you specify here are actually optional. It's useful to specify inputs in the workflow block when you're building more complex workflows that might need to reuse the same input for multiple downstream tasks or multiple purposes. Otherwise, you would probably define the inputs in the individual tasks themselves. But outputs, however, are different. Here, what you're specifying in the workflow block's output block are the outputs of the entire workflow that you want Cromwell to keep track of later. So this is basically saying to Cromwell, I want to keep these, whatever outputs are produced from this workflow, and I want you to put them in a special directory. So another top level component of a WDL workflow is the call. So a call is a component that defines which tasks a workflow will run. This is still located within the workflow block, but you can specify input parameters at this point to pass to that task. And specifying input parameters here at the call level is also optional. This is, you'd maybe want to specify them if, say, you're passing inputs that you've defined at the workflow block, say something that you've defined once globally and you want to pass it to a specific call, or if you want to say the output of one task as the input of another task. Otherwise, you would probably specify inputs at the task level. So the tasks are the third high-level WDL component I want to go over today. And a task is basically referred to within a call within the workflow block, but it's actually defined outside of that workflow block. So let's go over what tasks are in depth. So a task defines all the necessary information to perform an action. The command block is that action that you want to perform in a task. So the command is actually required when you define a task block. So basically the command is, you're saying this, I want this to be run in the execution environment. It's very simple to the commands you'd run on your command line. You can specify multiple lines or multiple commands within your command block. So to further specify what we can define at a task level let's go over some inputs. So inputs to a command or inputs to a task are optional and they're only required if that task will have inputs. Inputs must be typed. So for example, I'm saying that this input called my name is going to be a file, and I'm passing that file will be used in my command. but the inputs that you specify here can also be optional. As in, the individual inputs can be optional and the entire input block can be optional in itself. So if you want to say that an individual input is optional, someone does not need to pass something, you would give it a question mark. If you want to set a default value for an input, you can also do that as well. So if somebody does not give me this file, then set my name equal to foobar, for example. And so at the task level, you're also defining some outputs for your task. So in the output section, you're saying these are the values that should be exposed as outputs after a successful run of this task. And outputs, just like inputs, must also be typed file, string, integer, object, etc. So we've gone over a few basic pieces of a task. We've gone over the inputs, the command, and the outputs. And that is actually all you need to run a very simple task in a workflow.